Welcome to the Alain Elkann interviews, an unprecedented window into the minds of some of the most well-known and respected figures of the last 25 years.
Minsuk Cho is today in London with us in this beautiful pavilion at the Serpentine Gallery.
Thank you very much.
It's the 23rd Serpentine Gallery Pavilion, and every year a famous architect is doing his own pavilion, and you did it. And what is also important is that it's your first job, let's say your first project in the United Kingdom.
That's what every architect has been.
Yes, and this place is called
Archipelagic Void.
Yes. And it's divided in 5 pavilions, which are called 5 islands. So please describe me this pavilion here in the middle of Hyde Park in the Serpentine Gallery. I mean, outside the Serpentine Gallery.
Yes, it has been an honor to follow 22 great architects and artists. Some of them I admire, mostly, very much, and do something is quite daunting task. But mostly, previous pavilion, altogether common qualities, how to create some kind of a generosity for a structure, architecture, in public space for park visitors, tourists, and so on. The park itself is an iconic, historic gesture. It's really great to follow works of 22 architects and artists who came before us. And they all explored ways to be generous toward public in this beautiful park in different ways and demonstrating what architecture can do in this particular location. And for us, it was quite exciting to confront this beautiful site with elements around the site, surroundings, trees and building next to it, which is used as a gallery. But also at the same time, on top of these physical surroundings, I think the history of these 22 editions, in a way, each one with a very particular narrative they discovered through the site, through their design, and accumulation of 22 times of that has built for collective memory.
You built here a kind of a star.
Yes.
Made of 5.
Yes. This is how my motivation was. We looked at these 22 pavilions, where they were located, and we kind of overlapped their footprint on top of each other. And it turned out one particular area was very much used. So we thought we'll give it a rest, and we kept it as an empty space. So as a result of that, what was given was a peripheries, sort of edges on the site that seems to have a much more challenging condition because there are trees that you cannot touch. There are also roads and so on. But that become a quite exciting, maybe possibilities that we can point out. And one of the ways we thought this multiple condition that we start to look at was that instead of giving a singular purpose for the space, usually there was always 2 kind of activities they were required to contain, which is the larger space for 200 people capacity events, where we are at, which we call Auditorium, and also cafe. So often it's in this grand canopy contain these 2 functions. But then on top of, we separate that into an auditorium, and we call it a tea house. That's the second element. And tea house was an interesting one because Serpentine South, the building next to it, used to be tea house in 1934. So it became a gallery in 1970, so we thought we would honor the history that we found out.
But then you have a library of unread books.
Yes, exactly.
A small library.
Library came about was that we had this one corner of the site, which is facing north, related to actually what we call pavilions in my traditional culture. Usually it's a humble structure, small wooden structure, sitting on a stone plinth, looking out to the beautiful landscape, and often associated with the scholarly literary activities, writing poetries and texts, or doing calligraphies, often singing, chanting together, poetries and so on. So I thought that would be a great element to bring that, but also it echoes with Korean, currently the city that I'm at, Seoul, contemporary urban culture. We have started small library projects we meaning the city of Seoul, in the park. And it became a very excited response and very well used. So it's actually proliferating throughout the public parks in Seoul. So I thought maybe that culture can be interesting to be introduced. And then a Serpentine curatorial team come up with this great existing work by Singaporean artist Himan Chong, and together with the archivist Rene Stahl, they've been already doing this project called Library of Unread Books. You have so much books that stacked up. I think most people have that, and they hand out the book to have this untapped knowledge explored by other people, also explaining there's a format why they didn't read it.
After all, you concentrate in this space,
yes.
in these pavilions.
Yes.
The concept of emptiness,
yes.
for instance, has a lot to do with your work.
Yes.
Or the tea house is something you already did in Korea.
Very much so.
Factory.
Yes.
Next to it, you did a tea pavilion. So you have,
in fact,
here some of your...
my previous experience.
Yes.
Yeah. No, that's a well-researched statement you had. Tea culture is also, it was, a very different context. But this tea farm that we've been involved since 2011 is an interesting mission that we used to have a tea culture from Buddhist era, from India all the way 7th century for quite some time, but recently become most people drinking coffee. Coffee is also nice, but this was one family's kind of ambition or mission to bring back the tea culture. So that's how it began, and it's doing quite well. It's been 40 years for them, but I thought also interesting, the UK used to drink always coffee and then tea, but then, so we had this shared common culture, and then this globalization somehow changed it a little bit, but so I thought we should highlight it. So at least, there they sell coffee, but also bring...
And the Buddhism is something you're also interested because you need a temple.
That's right. Zen Buddhism temple. I can consider myself as a Zen Buddhist because it's not really in a religion. It's more about way of living. Also, yesterday someone asked me at this big opening, she said, "Are you Buddhist?" So, and she said, "This looks like a mandala," and which was very exciting. A lot of people say something. It looks like a star. It looks like also somebody said, Swiss Army knife pavilion. It's many functions, right?
Yeah, but besides the pavilion, let's talk about you. Your father was an architect.
That's right.
And then you decided at a certain point that you yourself wanted to be an architect.
Yes.
You studied at the university in Seoul.
Yes.
Then you went to Columbia University
New
in
York. Yes.
Then you worked in New York. Then you went to OMA in Rotterdam.
Yes.
So you had a Dutch experience.
Yes.
And then you went back to New York and with John Slade.
That's right. James Slade. Yeah.
In 2003, you opened an architectural study.
Yes.
So you worked in America. Then after September 11, you decided to go back to Korea.
Yes.
And there, using your previous experiences plus your own particular taste, you did a lot of projects in Korea.
That's correct. Yes.
Including, you said this is a pavilion, but you did other pavilions. You did one of the Shanghai famous fair.
Shanghai Expo.
Then you did in Venice at the Biennale.
Correct.
And many others. Why do you like to do pavilions?
This is a good question because from this occasion, I realized my entire career has been related to pavilions. And in fact, right now we are making another kind of pavilion, which is kind of a complete found condition. We are using existing old, unused power plant, boiler, what's been containing, supporting boiler structure, taking out the boiler, only the structure remains, into a pavilion. And we call it a hyper pavilion because it's really large.
Where?
In city of Seoul. It's like kind of inspired by Tate Modern, by the river. Most power plants are near water for cooling purpose, but this is another appropriation of an industrial structure turned into a cultural space. It's under construction now, but a lot of it is taking out and completely doing a found condition as a sort of way of making pavilion. But back to your question about pavilion, I think because we've been doing so many pavilions because Pavilions is such an open-ended genre of architecture. Venice Biennale Korean Pavilion was actually, I didn't design the pavilion, but I was a curator. And
you won in 2014.
Golden Lion, yes. Thank you. I was a commissioner, curator, and exhibition designer, to be correct. This pavilion was the last national pavilion built in Giardini in Venice, 1995, designed by Minsuk Cho and Mancuso, who's still around and is a different architect, so I didn't design that. But I think that is also important pavilion. And I think more history with the pavilion is a really embodied aspiration of how bring people together and place to meet.
It's like to use a square.
In a way, but covered square. You can consider it as a covered square.
You said somewhere that Korean architecture is inspired a lot by a mixture of Chinese and Japanese cultures together. And then you also said that in Korea, buildings last more than 30 years. And that there were so many huge buildings built in Korea and China in a very, very short time that you saw a lack of sensitivity.
Yes,
right?
yes.
And therefore your architecture will try to be a mixture between this speed architecture and more sensitivity. Can you answer to these three concepts?
It's not on a philosophic level, but what made me go back to Korea around the 9/11 time, earlier this century, with this euphoria of this new millennial energy and new technology and so on, was that Korea was showing first it become very civic democratic society. Plus, before that, over maybe 40 years, was a fastest urbanized country in the world. It reached to 90% of population living in urban area. And it was before that happened, half century ago, it was the other way around, 20% urban population. So it's all about creating a wealth that become city, to build the city. I think it's a similar pattern of this industrialized, capitalist development and so on in the 20th century. Yet what was very interesting moment at the time when I come back was that big crisis happened. It was the first time it was going up and up and up, and then it just stopped, went down very quickly. And then from that on, actually, we saw cities that stopped growing, because I grew up seeing these massive developments only, and with the entire thing will converge into a large city almost.
Was this development well done?
I mean, it's well done for if the purpose is something that is quickly providing 5 million houses, and if you hear something with such an ambitious plan, then that goal is well done. But did they consider quality? Of course, you have to sacrifice things.
That's why you say that it will only last 30 years.
Exactly. It was in a way, I think it was much more disposable, and it was like a literal translation of the wealth into this concrete structure very quickly, because everybody wants to join this modern urban life with the wealth they have. So all the farmers come to city and they build the city. I mean, a lot of that is happening in developing countries, maybe outside of Western Europe.
30 years go like in a second, right? What is going to happen afterwards?
Of course, this was something that they didn't consider. So of course now, what I'm saying was at that moment when I came back, so this was when Korea has given such an exciting diverse situations that I can explore, because there is a very strong urban energy of creating these new cities. At the same time, there are things that need to be protected or preserved, or we have to work with this much more complex situations that we have overlooked during this fast growth, because we demolished so much things and erased so much histories. So these all challenges given at the same time was such an exciting condition for me, because my work is mostly all in Korea. I'm saying not because I'm such a local guy, because I feel so very foreign there, but it gives me so many exciting new foreign conditions.
From the French embassy.
That's right. Also, you have researched so much, amazing.
What are the most, let's say one is probably proud of some of his works, right? Which are the iconic works? Which one you consider your iconic works? I mean, now you created a new architectural place called Mass Studios, right?
Mass studies.
Yes.
Mass studies.
Mass studies is your firm.
Yes.
Right? So what did you produce with these studies?
I mean, I don't
You're
know.
more proud of, right?
Yeah, I mean, just recent example will be what you mentioned, the Zen Buddhist temple we have done. And it's actually started being used a year and a half ago, but some part wasn't completed until now, but it's about to be completed one part because I wouldn't say it's an iconic project, but it become a quite iconic in a sense that a lot of people go there to visit it. Iconic not in a visual, it's not very showy project, let's say, but it's really hidden in this very complex urban condition. You have to sort of find the way, almost hide and seek kind of way.
You like that, how thin buildings hide. Also in the tea.
Depends. Yeah. The tea house case was just nature was so beautiful that we want really the building to be the side note. We want to see as buildings, what we call this tea pavilion as a sort of beautiful passages that happen to be covered. And then it become an interior because they have winter there too. Yeah, this temple is quite unique project, but reason why I am very proud is that I didn't do it myself, but I work with the users, meaning the people belongs to temple and their monks, to communicate with the neighbors, to create this, what we call urban acupuncture process, which is no dead end, no dead spaces in between the neighbors. So we really encourage them to communicate and do this collective effort. So what happened was, in a way, it resembles this Archipelagic Void pavilion because it also has a madang, open space, place for gathering because it's temple, you need that. But you can circulate around and you can access from 7 different alleyways, which didn't happen before. It was only one corner, one alleyway was the only access. Before was all, retaining walls or other kind of barriers, but we kind of made it. That's why it taken so long and still construction going on, but maybe in a month it will complete. So for me, this kind of process is quite interesting because this Serpentine Pavilion is exciting because the whole thing takes 6 months from conception to completion. This is a very unusual thing they created. As I'm proud of it now, this amazing history, I'm very also grateful to observe this unique,
This lasts for a few months.
5 months. And then it will go somewhere.
You also build homes, houses?
Once in a while. I wouldn't consider as a private home expert, but we've done mostly for friends, actually.
You don't like that, it's not your...
You have to create a very strong, intimate relationship with the client. You have to know them very well, so I feel more comfortable working with my friends who I already know better.
And what are your future projects?
We are always thinking about future, but right now 3 things going on is the one I already mentioned, power plant conversion into a cultural space by the river, main river of Seoul.
Who is investing, the state or private?
This is the central government, Ministry of Culture. It's been taking 6 years. So I've been giving tour for cultural minister, 4 different cultural ministers because it changes all the time.
But they support.
Of course, there's a budget assigned for it, and it's a really immense effort to communicate and use the tax money properly. I think I'm very much into that because I think European system that I learned, that I observed, some of my really good friends, I don't know, maybe more often in France, developed their career with this, doing something for the public directly with the public sector work. I'm really into that. And we're doing another one is social housing that we are building. This is also through the competition for young people, 100 units, but building on top of water prevention infrastructure. So it's very unique type because city had this property in a very interesting, good location surrounded by universities. It was a place they had to build this water pump station. Once a year, maybe 6 hours a year they use it. When the river start flood, you have to have this backup reservoir. So they decided it's such a good location. So let's maybe have this multi-use space, build housing for younger people, almost like a social incubator. They can rent out certain period of time, like 8 years or something. So that was this very good intention that we are involved, but also it has to have a new architectural imagination, of course, in a kind of not only as a single object, but as a part of the city infrastructure as well.
You say that architecture has political importance.
Yes, of course.
Can you explain this concept?
It's
I mean,
not.
I know you refer to Churchill somehow.
Yeah, that's a very often quoted Churchill's famous word, but I come from a country that has been unwillingly divided since 1945, North and South Korea. 300 kilometers of wall, which is an architecture that clearly is a result of political situation. So I think it's really what we do has the implication of how what's included, what is not included. Of course, with this all now untangible digital culture plays another complexity in politics as well. But I think I am very aware of this very simple. That's why also this temple project was very important, because no walls in between, and these things actually come as a most vivid, concrete sort of a result, actually. Yeah.
How is it to operate in a country which is more and more prosperous and important in Far East Asia, and you have North Korea just next door, which is the opposite somehow?
Yep.
How do you feel about it?
I think that condition has...
They are the same people out there.
Absolutely, but then it become a culturally very different people. But we've been maintaining more very unique culture because we happen to be on the edge of a big continent with a small enclave. So somehow it's contained in very unique language, unique food, cultures, but somehow unwillingly, as a result of a Cold War, it's been going on last 80 years, 79 years now. So, of course, we want to have a peaceful coexistence, but our decision is not completely, we cannot make an autonomous decision also. We have to work with always other superpower countries' interests around it. I mean, that's how also division happened and how the war happened just before that. So, for me, maybe speaking about my previous little attempt that we did for the Venice Biennale Korean Pavilion was still maybe there is a role in architecture to connect these two separated sort of country, which been as a single state for more than 1,000 years, and whether architecture can be ways to sort of become a window to understand each other, as much as maybe more popular ways could be a sports games. I mean, there has been this kind of a simple attempt, but architecture's unique language allows people interact and engage and understand in very unique, positive way. That was my belief. That's how I wanted to have that opportunity of organizing exhibition as a way to bring these two countries together, although it didn't happen exactly the way I wanted to.
But you say that architecture, because the world is changing fast, and the needs of people change and habits change.
Yes.
Even architecture has to change fast.
Yes.
And that's probably why it lasts only 30 years. I mean,
Yes.
Because the needs will be different. In the other sense, as you studied architecture, look at the pyramids in Egypt or the ruins of the Roman Empire who are still there, or buildings who are very old.
Yes.
And this was one of the most things that lasted,
Yes.
for many centuries.
Yeah.
So this kind of buildings will not exist anymore. I mean, the new concept of architecture.
Yes.
You don't build in order to say, okay, I build this tower, this pavilion, this place for another 300 or 3,000 years. You don't think like that anymore.
First of all, I definitely have your sentiment about something that lasts longer. What we are basically doing is organizing material world that's taken from the nature to create with a purpose, I think, to create a society. That explains why I use the word mass for our company name, because mass is a kind of, we use word in physics and scientific studies about nature, or mass equals, something, but also used in a field such as sociology, mass culture, mass media, and so on. Discover as a one word has been very fascinating, but as a also very conscious, like many of my colleagues, architects, who care about what this world is going, the earth, the whole, what's happening globally. I think we shouldn't think one is means to reach to an end. Like the nature, are we taking things from nature and to create society, or through various buildings or through cities? I think there has been a lot of these kind of thoughts came out. So not only the human-centric position, but of course in terms of using resources, we have to be very careful. So architecture, for me, my country is still really, honestly, a lot of work that we turn down. Actually, we have more works turned down, but that has to do with that kind of, let's say, problems we found it problematic in this, because we don't want to be participating in this redundancy of not using resources in a very inconsiderate way.
There are two ways of thinking of architecture, basically, among the different architects that I have interviewed.
Yes.
Some believe in skyscrapers, bigger and bigger, taller and taller. Others, they believe in a city where the architecture is spread. London is a city. Vis-a-vis other cities. And also it's interesting to see, as you said, that in a very few years, in China also, in Korea, cities were built like that. And instead, for instance, in Europe, cities are made of layers, hundreds of
palimpsest
model. What is your idea of architecture in general? Because maybe one day you will want to build things also, go back to America or come to
Not at all.
No?
I don't have that fantasy.
You don't want to build in Europe or in America? No.
Not to kind of, because I'm having so much fun in my own country.
But if suddenly someone says, we have seen your pavilion, we love what you do.
If I find it, there could be a meaningful exploration of a different culture. Of course, as I said, I feel very foreign to my own country. That explains my second word for my company, studies, because it's sort of a determination to remain as a student, because the world is changing, so I don't want to become this jaded professional, but I take it as a new challenge. So it shouldn't matter. But I think to engage something far away, I think it takes a lot of good convincing and decision. But if I can find a meaningful connection, and I think it has to do with the level of intimacy, because I think I've seen my time being in Korea over the last 30 years, very fluid, active exchange, but mostly coming from foreign architects doing buildings in Korea. In a way, they're in the bubble. You don't really engage in depths, but they're bringing their names or brand, whatever you call it. And of course, they have people with the means who are attracted by their prestige or whatever they symbolizes. It has been the kind of cash or mode of transaction. But I really don't need to do that. Korea gives me so much fun opportunities that get into more than just bubble.
From a remote country in between Japan and China, suddenly Seoul became a hub, like London or New York, or one of the cities where people want to go, where there are art fairs, there are many artists.
Of course.
I mean, what do you think about that? About
that part, I'm very much
of Korea, I mean, artists, music.
I've been very much part of that. I am very much part of, let's say, why that happened. Because of this long authoritarian regime, my generation, I think people who's getting recognition, I mean, in their 50s, 60s, 40s, they kind of grew up in that very regime that was freedom of expression was not quite supported. I study architecture or philosophy through all the pirated books because a lot of them were forbidden to read, things like this. That's why I moved to America. And then all of a sudden, late 90s, when Korea opened up and developed as a more civil democratic society, all of a sudden, people who were frustrated came back, like myself, or who stayed through, but who weren't able to express, start to freely express. That's why I think kind of result is now coming out because they become kind of mature artists or musicians or writers and so on, or film directors. I think what you're seeing is pretty much coming from the milieu of very compressed social change and political evolution.
It's accepted everywhere. I mean, you have Thailand, Philippines, Vietnam, China.
Each one is very unique political history, so
I know, but I mean, you have interchange.
Yes, economically, yes, more and more so. But culturally, I think
each
also
country is different.
Yes.
Because this is something maybe in the West is not completely perceived, right?
Yeah.
Now they say that Japan and Korea are getting closer. You have this big neighbor, China.
China, Japan, America, basically. Also Russia. We are always historically, because of this geopolitical dynamism, then the position of it, that's how it's situated, has been that way.
And from your country,
yes,
it's talking about how is your country looking at the West?
country looking at the West, my generation is quite different from the younger generation now.
Right.
They don't really feel need to go out and study outside or have an experience, I think. Less and less so. I mean, what has happened in Japan, maybe? A generation, maybe my generation, before generation. And I think that kind of worries me a little bit because there's a bit of too much national pride. Yeah. But my time, I really had to get out because I knew that I wouldn't survive as a creative being at the time. And then realize also the time has changed around millennial change. That's why I made a move back. But the Western things, I think there's still in terms of democracy, we looked up to certain countries that we can have much fair, much freer society together with more equal way of, I think also the whole multicultural model, something that Korea still had to learn because Korea, for geographical reason, has been quite long time homogeneous country, let's say ethnically, so there's a less of an issue there, but that's not just because we're not interested, but it just happened that way because how we position in the map. Although because of this global situation, now we have more and more immigrants and migrations happening because we become richer than before and so on. So I think these things, dealing with a much more diverse society with much more complex kind of constellation of differences, these should be more practiced and learned from the West. I think that's what I admire about what's happening in America, despite of, we have better social system than America. I think, for example, healthcare and things like that. I think compared to Europe, I think it's also, we are kind of neoliberal country, but we also have a quite good system or less polarizing. It changes depending on the politics because we have quite healthy dynamic oscillation between this way and that way every 5 years.
Alain Elkann interviews.